Welcome to this Moving Panels One Shot. Let's have a nerdy little conversation. And we are in the midst of our new March Madness, where we are pitting two legendary DC television series against each other to determine who made the bigger impact, who created the better universe. Is it Smallville or is it Arrow? And that's the show we're talking about today. A couple of weeks ago, the dapper Southern gent, Blake Fowler, joined me for a nerdy little conversation about the events that led to the creation of Smallville. And today we're going to take a deep dive into the origins of the series Arrow. How did we get from Smallville as Oliver Queen to the grittier take on the Emerald Archer? And what was the plan from the very beginning? And joining me on this conversation is two of my frequent co-hosts. Please welcome Justin Baker and Tim Williams. How are you, gentlemen?
Doing good. Thank you for having me.
Yep, very glad to be here. Thank you so much.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this. Of course, Arrow was on the CW, which was the same network that aired Smallville. Of course, Smallville started on the WB, but then the WB merged with UPN and became the CW, and so Smallville was one of those shows that transferred. But again, was on the CW. Arrow then would continue on the CW. There would just be really kind of a 1-year gap between the end of one and the beginning of the other. So we did have Green Arrow on Smallville, played by Justin Hartley, who anybody who's a friend of the, not a friend, but a fan of the current show Tracker, that's Justin Hartley. He was originally Green Arrow, Oliver Queen. I've already talked to both of these gentlemen before we started recording, but neither one of them are super familiar with Smallville, but they I think know what he looked like. Justin Hartley as Green Arrow. So what are your thoughts on, just maybe visually, if that's all you know, the version of Green Arrow that they had in Smallville?
From what I remember of him, he came off more of Oliver McQueen than Green Arrow. He had that pretty boy look. Definitely played the millionaire, billionaire persona. Not really buying the vigilante that he was.
Yeah. Smallville did focus a lot more on the superhero aspect of things. So even as Green Arrow, he was very, colorful, and he had that flashy suit and all. Tim, you got any thoughts about him?
Yeah, I was gonna say I agree with Justin that even though I don't remember seeing any of the actual episodes with Justin Hartley, I've seen some pictures of him, but I could see, just knowing him, the actor from This Is Us and now on Tracker, I could see it being him doing pretty well as Oliver Queen, but I don't think he would have been as strong as the Green Arrow.
So there was talk very quickly after he was introduced. There was talk about doing a spinoff series. I mean, they wanted to expand this universe. I do know that Justin Hartley was not a fan of doing a solo series, and from what I gathered, there wasn't much more to it other than a talk about doing it. There was never any development of a series. There did apparently seem to be development, though, in a Justice League series. So in Smallville, they kind of introduced their version of the Justice League, which had Aquaman, of course, Green Arrow, Cyborg, Black Canary, who am I free? Oh, and Impulse, which was their version of the Flash, because it was Bart Allen. So there was apparently, they were starting to move forward with that, but that didn't go anywhere either. What do you think? Because again, with you not knowing the show that well, I don't know how familiar you are with their incarnation of Justice League, but do you think it would have worked to just go straight to a Justice League spinoff series?
Well, we saw how well that worked in the movie franchise. So I don't know if...
And this would have been without like Batman and Superman and
so
Wonder Woman.
I don't think so. And, even thinking back to when that was going on, like, groundbreaking probably if it would have worked, but it was definitely a gamble because shows weren't really doing that as much as they do now, of creating that universe of having multiple, like what the Arrowverse became, which took time. Like that didn't happen immediately when Arrow started. So, I think it would have been a gamble for sure. Would it have paid off? I'm not sure because, like you said, without having those, key elements of who people want to see in the Justice League, would it have translated as well?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go with Tim on that one. From what I remember about Smallville was after so many seasons when they're rolling in all these other superheroes, I mean, a lot of people that I knew that used to watch it pretty regularly had kind of quit watching Smallville. They'd lost interest. It wasn't about Clark Kent anymore, from what I remember. So I'd agree it'd probably be a big gamble, especially if you're not going to have the heavy hitters in that show.
Yeah, as a Smallville fan, it definitely, because of course I watched it as it aired, but there definitely was, some fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell it was. I remember talking with another teacher that I was working with at the time who was a big Superman fan. It was, how long can you do a series about Clark Kent becoming Superman without him actually being Superman?
Right.
A long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, apparently 10 years was the answer to that question. So of course the CW said, you know what? Okay, instead of continuing within this Smallville universe, we're going to just start over and create a whole new universe. And they decided to go a little bit more gritty, make the character a little bit more grounded, focus more on him being a vigilante instead of him being superhero. Of course, a lot of connections with the Dark Knight trilogy that was in theaters at almost at the exact same time here. I think, because this series debuted in 2012, which was the same year that The Dark Knight, so the second of the Nolan movies, had come out. So, of course, a lot of influence there. And, of course, completely separated from Smallville. And so here you have producers and writer Greg Berlanti, Mark Guggenheim, and Andrew Kreisberg. That would be the team that would create Arrow. Now, before the Arrowverse, were either of you familiar with Greg Berlanti?
No.
Nope.
So I wrote down a couple of shows that he was the creator and a writer for, and producer as well. Everwood.
Okay.
Brothers and Sisters.
Yeah, I remember that show.
Remember that?
Never saw it, but I remember it.
One of my personal favorites, Eli Stone.
Yes, I loved Eli Stone.
I loved Eli Stone.
That was a good show. I was mad when that got canceled.
Yeah. And speaking of another one that was short-lived, but one that I enjoyed, No Ordinary Family.
Yes, we watched that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
We were big fans of that show. So the
one
first
that
season,
I would...
Yeah, the first season was definitely stronger than the second season, but we were upset that it didn't last very long.
Yeah, one that I definitely would like to cover on this, even though it's not adapted, it is inspired.
There you go.
By comic books. So, yeah. So Greg Berlanti, as you see there, and that's just a snippet of some of the shows that he was a part of. And then Mark Guggenheim, he wrote as well for many of those shows. So you're familiar with those shows. You're also, because they seem to be kind of a team. And then Andrew Kreisberg, also, I found out he was a writer for Eli Stone, but he also wrote for, I don't know if y'all are a fan, I was a fan, Warehouse 13.
Yeah, I remember that one.
It was a
sci-fi channel show that I was a big fan of. And Boston Legal.
Yeah. I think I watched a few. I wasn't a big fan of that one, but I did watch a couple episodes.
I was a fan of that one as well. He did like an episode of Law and Order. He did like an episode of like these other shows, but those were the ones that I saw where he had done several episodes. So I mean, yeah, bringing in a pretty good team here. And of course, we call it the Arrowverse, but I think it also has been known as the Berlantiverse.
Yes, I've heard it referred to that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So So, of course, this would kick it off. But I will ask you, what do you think made, other than what we've talked about, or if you want to elaborate more on what we talked about, what do you think made Arrow stand out from Smallville? Like, what do you think was the best things that CW were using to hook people who maybe were not fans of Smallville and said, hey, we want to pull you into Arrow? Like, do y'all remember the lead in, like the commercials or?
No, because I didn't really. A friend of mine, when Arrow aired, I think I had heard about it, but I didn't watch the pilot until it had been on for like a month or so. And a friend of mine was like, "Oh, you've got to watch it. Go back, at least watch the pilot and tell me what you think." And so I watched part of the first season and then kind of fell off, and then eventually went back and watched it from the beginning. But I think for me, so it's hard for me to really compare them because I think they're very different. Smallville was all about Clark Kent before he became Superman. So it was like the most long origin story you would have without ever seeing, him actually become Superman. So I think they learned that, like, if the show's a hit, you can't do that for too long. So let's still give us an origin story, but not, Oliver Queen in high school, so I think it was a step up from what Smallville was without trying to duplicate it, which I think is smart, because if they duplicated it, it probably wouldn't have lasted as long. But yeah, I think it's hard to compare the two, but I think Arrow caught on quicker because the action was there, the vigilante was already there, even by the end of the first episode. So
yeah, I'd have to agree. They basically took whatever Smallville had done and just kind of, well, this is where they went wrong. Let's change it up. They're an origin story. We're going to go ahead and talk about, by the end of episode 1, he's already, the vigilante. He's set up his lair. Smallville's bright and colorful. This is dark and gritty. So they took a lot of what Smallville had done. I think they just kind of tweaked it a little bit. And I'd also say the mystery element, the story, how it was just told with the flashbacks and stuff, made it a lot different. You could know absolutely nothing about Oliver Queen and Green Arrow, and you would have been hooked just on some of the mystery elements of it.
Yeah. So let's get into, of course, Smallville, the kind of the mantra that they lived by was no flights, no tights.
Right. Yeah.
He would be Clark. Clark would never fly. Clark would never wear a super suit. And then, yes, this show immediately goes into he is Green Arrow straight from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Although he doesn't call himself that. And then as the series would progress, he would just be known as like the Hood to start off with. Right. Mm-hmm. And then he would later be called Arrow. Mm-hmm. And then he wouldn't fully go to Green Arrow until it became a little bit more comic bookish as the series went along.
Right.
But now what the idea that Berlanti had behind this was he had essentially what he called a 5-year plan. If you remember from the first episode, it is stated that Oliver had been on the island for 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the idea was to make these flashbacks, a la Lost, to do these flashbacks that would kind of be his origin story,
right?
While he is already the Green Arrow, and so you would parallel his journey as each season would cover like a year that he spent on the island. And so, of course, that was the idea. And then, what happened after you go 5 years? Well, they adjusted and whatnot. But again, having that allowed them to develop the origin, have his transformation from this, privileged, rich young kid, 20-something-year-old kid, and turning into this, hardened vigilante. He murders a dude the first time we see him as Arrow.
Right.
So I do find it funny that they do this flashback thing because there's actually a reference to the television show Lost in the first episode.
Oh yeah.
So I did find that funny. So what did you think? Even if you haven't seen the rest of it, again, we're going to talk about the first episode next week. But what do you think of that idea of doing the flashbacks and seeing the 5 years that he spent on the island while watching whatever Green Arrow is experiencing in Starling City?
I'd say, I mean, that's what really kind of hooked me on the show, was if you got tired of one plot line, you had the other. If you were tired of the flashbacks, you had the present day. If you were tired of the present day, you had the flashbacks. So there's kind of more to, keep your attention.
I was going to say, I think because Lost had solidified that storytelling and that they knew that viewers would go along with it, that kind of helped them. And then too, I think it's smart. I mean, like you said, you're able to do the origin, the becoming Green Arrow, and then while he is like merging those two together, where you get both in one for each episode, I think was pretty smart, pretty ingenious for them to be able to figure that out. And yeah, give a nod to Lost, because if Lost had not been a hit and people hadn't gravitated towards it and it been such a huge show that it was, it wouldn't have gone on. Now, I will say, like, nowadays, whenever I'm watching a show and it automatically goes to flashbacks, I'm like, please, not again. Can we find another way to tell a story? But then it was the best thing going.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I know this is not what we're talking about, but Lost came at a perfect time.
Yeah,
because it was the show, shrouded in mystery. And it was right at the time where the internet was a thing, but it wasn't the thing that it would become. And
exactly.
And then, of course, we're still watching shows week to week, and we would get those like 6 months between seasons. And so there was all the talking about what's going to happen, what's happening,
It was one of the last real water cooler shows that they would say.
Yeah,
you had
absolutely
that next day to talk about what happened and what the theories were. I remember there was like, I was a big reader of Entertainment Weekly. I know we're not talking about Lost, but here we are talking about Lost.
Yeah.
But there, like, when I guess it came on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, I can't remember now, but whatever that next day was, there was a writer that would, do a breakdown of the episode and what the internet was talking about or what other people, and I had to read that every week.
Yeah.
So that I could, like, that was, I didn't have anybody that really talked. There were a few people I talked about it with at the time, but like, I wanted to know like what other people were talking about. And like I said before, I wasn't big in like chat rooms and stuff like that, but like that was kind of the internet, being able to find out information about a show if you couldn't talk to somebody else about it directly. So.
Yeah, or even things like, hey, did you see this in the episode?
Yeah,
or,
the Easter eggs or the hidden clues,
Yeah, which made it a thing. And so, then you got Arrow coming out 2 years later, because Lost ended in 2010, Smallville ends in 2010, and then here's Arrow in 2012, kicking things off and kind of bringing all that together that was, big hits over the last couple of years. And then again, we already talked about the connection to the Nolan Dark Knight trilogy of movies. And I think that they knew what they were doing, and clearly it showed with the legacy that Arrow would eventually leave, which we'll talk more about in a couple of weeks when we actually compare the two shows, the two series, and decide which one did we think had the bigger legacy. But we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Again, next week we are going to talk about the pilot episode of Arrow. But this is how Arrow came to be. And yes, it may not have been the Smallville spinoff that some fans were expecting, but it became something all its own. And so that is what we are now going to get into. So tune in next week as we talk about the first episode of the show Arrow. And thank you, Tim and Justin, for joining me. And we'll talk again next week about the first episode of Arrow.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you for having us.
All right, thanks everybody for listening to this Moving Panels one-shot. Do not forget to subscribe to the show, leave us a review, check out our other episodes, especially the ones that Blake and I did on Smallville the last couple of weeks here for our March Madness. But we'll go ahead and wrap things up for today. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.